LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the September 4th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the 11 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from my video title, I'm responding to this poll that I also showed in the thumbnail. You'll see it in a couple of the news summaries, including the CNN news summary, where it's showing Trump 46%, Joe Biden 46%. Who would you vote for if the election were held today? This is a Wall Street Journal poll among registered voters. I find that kind of disturbing. Why is it that it seems like half of U.S. voters are willing to vote for an alleged felon, quite probably a convicted felon by the time the election comes around? And one of the saddest parts of that is I know that there are at least a few viewers who see that and they think when I talk about the alleged felon, they think Joe Biden, right? Because there's this whole alternative universe of conservative media, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, and they think it's like the Biden crime family, and they can't understand why there are 46% of people voting for Joe Biden. I actually almost took that clip for you on Fox and Friends this morning, where they were in some diner or something in Tennessee, and they went around and were talking about these poll results, and people couldn't understand how anyone could vote for Biden, not Trump, the alleged felon with 91 felony counts against him in 4 different jurisdictions. And I'm actually going to show you 5 different Republicans trying to answer that question. Well, not really Mike Pence, because he's on Fox News Sunday and they don't really directly ask him. In fact, the question they ask him almost answers the question. And that's the final clip I'll show you if you watch all 11. But as usual, I'd like to start with a political comedy clip. And this one is from Fox News reporting on this big storm at Burning Man over the weekend. You probably heard about, or it's been on the news a lot. And apparently their West Coast correspondent, Fox News's West Coast correspondent, Claudia Cowan, is a longtime fan of Burning Man, goes to Burning Man for, I think she said maybe 8 years, or I can't remember how many years, but she was talking about what Burning Man is all about with Fox News anchor Rich Edson, and it seems to me that she inadvertently endorsed socialism, maybe even communism, on a Fox News program, which I thought was kind of amusing, and I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Claudia, you're a Burning Man veteran at this point. For those of us who aren't too familiar with it, what's this all about? What's the vibe? What's going on there when it's not raining?
Well, it's not a music festival. It's not a music festival. It's a temporary city that is built for about a week, although the initial construction lasts many weeks before the gates open. My camp and we come in a few days early to build our bar. I don't know if we can show our bar. It's called Pickleback Mountain. So we actually build a bar that serves picklebacks. You can maybe see it beyond the muddy mess over there. And then we also have a pickle that you can ride. Over there is the green pickle that you can ride. So, it's a fun camp, and camps do all kinds of things. You can have poetry readings. You can have learn how to do the swings in a circus. And many, of course, are dance camps and sound camps, that kind of thing. So it's a temporary city where the main principle is gifting. So nothing costs any money except for ice. And people gift all kinds of wonderful things with no expectation of getting anything in return. It's almost like Halloween on steroids. And it's just a nice way to live for a week. And everybody's very friendly and giving and just excited to be here because it takes a lot of work to get here. So the people that are here are very excited. And even now with the rain, it's a positive attitude here. And we're just going to hunker down. I think the warm weather and the sunshine will return tomorrow, but they won't open these roads until the roads are dry for at least 36 hours. So we're thinking maybe Wednesday or Thursday. And then the big question is, how are 60,000 people all going to leave at once? Yeah. So we're waiting for some updates about that, too.
That was my next question, Claudia. You only plan to be there a week, just like everybody else, but it's all dependent on the weather.
So what do you think? Did the Fox News West Coast correspondent Claudia Cowan endorse socialism or communism right there on the Fox News broadcast this weekend? And then one other question I had about the whole thing, why doesn't socialism come with free ice? That also didn't make much sense to me. But anyway, that is my political comedy clip with, I don't know, what you think about that whole Burning Man situation. You can let me know in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to the main topic with the news summaries from longest to shortest. They all sort of dealt with this. I mean, some of even the Face the Nation one, which was only 18 seconds long, but the longest of the news summaries is a little over 4 minutes. It's the NBC News Meet the Press. I was thinking this might be Chuck Todd's last broadcast, but he didn't say goodbye and stuff. So I know sometime this month he's turning it over to Kirsten Welker. I guess we can talk about that when that happens. But here's Chuck Todd. One of, like I've mentioned this before on these news summaries, the test of our democracy facing a critical test. That's like one of the big themes they like to use on these Meet the Press news summaries, along with America Divided. That I think that's like their most common one for years has been America Divided. But this is our democracy facing a critical test. There's the possible impeachment of Joe Biden. There's the possible government shutdown. And of course, there's the leading Republican presidential candidate facing 91 felonies. And I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the first news summary together over here.
Good Sunday morning and a happy Labor Day weekend. Buckle up for a turbulent fall. Lawmakers will return to Washington this week to a political storm of their own making, with a Biden impeachment inquiry looking more and more likely, and uncertainty about whether the government can keep the lights on after this month. And there are televised pretrial proceedings in Atlanta that are about to begin in the first of 4 criminal trials tied to Donald Trump. All of it adds up to a series of critical tests for our democracy, and it's not clear our political leaders are equipped to meet this moment. Here in Washington, far from laying out a vision for the future of the country, Congress is focused on the bare minimum, just passing a bill to fund the government. Some House conservatives are making it clear they're not going to vote for any short-term spending bill, saying, quote, if a shutdown occurs, then so be it. And most of what we do up here is bad anyway. Most Americans won't even miss it, so some claim. Well, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is trying to hold off a shutdown, believing it's bad politics for the GOP. And he's arguing it actually would stall any impeachment inquiry that some of those same House conservatives would like to start.
It is a natural step forward that you would have to go to an impeachment inquiry. And I would actually like to have a short-term CR, only to make our argument stronger. Because, Maria, if we shut down, all of government shuts it down, investigation and everything else.
You heard McCarthy correctly. He is trying to leverage the impeachment carrot to persuade some House Republicans to keep the government open. But so far, many of those House conservatives aren't buying the deal.
We are not going to be distracted by a shiny object saying, if you don't get this continuing resolution passed, we won't be able to pursue the impeachment inquiry. That's nonsense.
The White House has stood up a war room of 24 lawyers, by the way, legislative aides and communication staffers, to lead an aggressive response to this expected Republican impeachment inquiry. Historically, it's been Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell who's been a shield against the sound and fury of House conservatives. It's one reason he is so unpopular with many of those House conservatives. In fact, he held a Wednesday press conference that was supposed to serve as a reality check because he announced that the Senate was going to pass a bipartisan bill to fund the government despite their complaints. But at that same Wednesday event, McConnell appeared to freeze again, this time for about 30 seconds. McConnell's office said he felt lightheaded. It's the same reason they gave for a July episode when he was caught on camera unable to speak for 20 seconds at a press conference. That was after a concussion from a serious fall in March. Now, McConnell's ability to lead is in serious doubt. There are questions, even in his inner circle, about how much longer that the longest-serving party leader in the Senate can serve. Just half an hour after the Capitol physician released a terse letter medically clearing McConnell to work, the usually friendly National Review to Senate Republicans called on McConnell to step aside and complaints are getting louder.
Right now, the Senate is the most privileged nursing home in the country.
I think it'd be most prudent if he stepped aside.
It's not at all unusual to have the response that sometimes happens to Mitch when you've had a severe concussion. It's part of the recovery. And so I'm confident he's going to be back to his old self.
That's right. President Biden was easily McConnell's loudest defender this week. Of course, the spotlight on McConnell's age and health is not great politically for President Biden. In fact, in a new AP NORC poll, more than 3/4 of Americans, including 69% of Democrats, say Biden is too old to effectively serve a second term. Meanwhile, a majority of the country, 53%, approve of the criminal charges that have been brought against Trump in the 2020 election cases. Just 29% disapprove of those moves. Overall, just 24% believe Biden should run in 2024, and just 30% want to see Trump run. And yet, here we are. Well, joining me now is Republican Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire.
And NBC had a whole different poll, not the poll that the Wall Street Journal poll that was covered on most of the networks. That actually wasn't a bad news summary in terms of covering the events of the last week, which I guess what the flagship Sunday morning news analysis shows on each of the networks should in some ways cover the news of the last week. And so that was pretty good. And they showed how Joe Biden was standing up for Mitch McConnell. You didn't see a lot of that on Fox News. The next news summary, actually, it's about the same length as the ABC one, which actually I think might be a couple seconds longer. So they might be out of order. But I want to show the Fox News Sunday one next because they focused all on this supposed conflict between Biden and Ron DeSantis over Biden's trip to Florida after the hurricane came through, how he wanted to meet with DeSantis, but DeSantis wouldn't meet with him. And that was totally downplayed on all the other networks. The only coverage I saw was Biden saying, oh, he probably had other things he had to do. And it's no big deal. But I don't know why they're totally playing up that conflict over on Fox News Sunday. But it's Shannon Bream and Lucas Tomlinson, their reporter, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch that second news summary together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. As millions of Americans across several states work to recover from the impacts of Hurricane Idalia, there is finger pointing this weekend over a face-to-face meeting between President Biden and Governor DeSantis that didn't happen. The Florida governor says a meeting would have been very disruptive to relief efforts. But the Biden administration claims there was a mutually agreed on location. And there was, quote, no indication the governor was not going to be there. Let's go to Lucas Tomlinson live from the White House with the very latest following the president's visit to Florida. Hello, Lucas.
Hello, Shannon. For the second time in 2 weeks, President Biden toured a disaster zone, this time in Florida.
As I told your governor, if there's anything your state needs, I'm ready to mobilize that support.
President Biden speaking after touring the damage in Live Oak without Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is an hour south in Dixie County. 4,500 miles away, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was in Hawaii, conducting his own assessment in Maui after wildfires killed more than 100 people. While DeSantis declined to meet Biden with a second GOP debate looming, former governor, now Republican Senator Rick Scott played host.
The president did a great job with the early declaration before the storm hit the coast. That was a big deal.
In Live Oak, Biden was asked about the DeSantis snub.
Well, no, I'm not disappointed. He may have had other reasons but he did help us plan this.
Biden's FEMA chief has requested $12 billion to help Florida and Maui rebuild.
We are experiencing more severe weather events than we have ever experienced before.
Critics slam Biden for his earlier remarks comparing a small fire in his home to the destruction in Hawaii and Florida.
I almost lost my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat. Lightning struck my house. We had to be out of that house for about 7 months.
When Congress returns from its August recess, it could be forced to fund Florida and Hawaii disaster relief and Ukraine aid at the same time. To date, the U.S. has given Ukraine over $75 billion since the war began 18 months ago.
Some Republicans want this additional aid conditioned on the launch of an impeachment inquiry. Shannon?
We'll talk about all that and more. Lucas, thank you very much, live from the White House. Turning now to someone in the 2024 race to be the next person to live there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Joining us now, former Vice President and Republican presidential candidate Mike Pence. Mr. Vice.
And yeah, I will have a clip of Mike Pence. The questions that Shannon Bream asked sort of having to do with Trump's wrongdoing, but in kind of a backwards way. That's clip 11 at the end, the final clip. He'll be the last of the Republicans. By the way, if you're counting Republicans, there's Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Senator Mike Rounds, and Governor Chris Sununu talking to Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, all dealing in their own ways with the question about why it is that the Republicans seem ready to elect an alleged, and probably by the time he's nominated to be the Republican presidential candidate for president, he will be a convicted felon. Certainly by the time the election comes around, I think it's quite likely he'll be convicted in one of his 4 cases. One of them's going to be the first one to go to trial. It's hard to say which. It might be the January 6th case. The scheme to overturn the elections in federal court in Washington, D.C. That could easily be the first one to go to trial with Donald Trump as defendant. Although the Georgia case, the racketeering criminal enterprise to overturn the Georgia election results brought in Georgia state court, that might go to trial without Donald Trump as a defendant, because some of the 18 of his co-defendants have asked for a speedy trial and are scheduled to go to trial October 23rd, but I think those might be plea bargains in the making. We'll see how that turns out. But I said that last week, and I'm getting off on a big tangent, and you notice how before I finished criticizing the Fox News Sunday clip, I talked about some of its weird focus on the conflict between DeSantis and Biden. Is that supposed to help DeSantis rise in the polls as like fighting against Biden? And then they also, since I watch a lot of Fox News, like every day, every hour, they keep talking about how Biden can't empathize with people because he keeps talking about his kitchen fire. It was just a small kitchen fire, and he's comparing it to people who've lost their homes. And although at least in that news summary, they mentioned that the small kitchen fire kept him out of his house for 7 months or whatever. And anyway, I don't know why Fox News is obsessed with that Biden telling the story of his kitchen fire. I mean, like, politicians love to tell the same story over and over again in their speeches, and 80-year-olds also like to tell the same story over and over again. So an 80-year-old politician, what do you expect? What do you expect, Fox News? Anyway, the next news summary, ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's an okay news summary. They show that poll with the 46-46 Wall Street Journal poll result. The one bias they have here is they spend a lot of time on their exclusive guest, Vivek Ramaswamy. They do a whole intro on him, and later I'll show Vivek Ramaswamy as the first of the Republicans sort of answering the question about why half of the U.S. registered voters seem willing to elect an alleged felon as their next president. But before I get there, let's see the news summary and the Vivek Ramaswamy intro over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. There was a time when scandal, the whiff of scandal, or even a simple gaffe was the kiss of death for presidential candidacy. To say that is not our time is a pretty dramatic understatement. Donald Trump has been charged with 91 felonies in 4 jurisdictions, facing civil suits too, after 2 separate impeachments. But a new poll this weekend in the Wall Street Journal shows him increasing his lead over the Republican field, drawing support from 59% of GOP voters. Looking ahead to the general election, he's locked in a dead heat with Joe Biden. Today, we want to take a look at why this is happening, what it means for our democracy. And we begin with a Republican candidate who is both a challenger to and a supplicant of Donald Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy has called Trump the greatest president of the 21st century, promised to support him in the general election even if Trump is convicted of felonies. If Ramaswamy prevails, he promises to pardon Trump. We'll speak with him live after this report from Rachel Scott.
8 years after Donald Trump's march to the Republican nomination,
let's give it up for Vivek Ramaswamy.
Another outsider is making waves in the GOP. 38-year-old Vivek Ramaswamy is the first millennial Republican presidential candidate.
We do need somebody of a different generation to lead this nation forward.
With no political experience, he's calling for generational change, doubling down on Trump's most extreme policies.
The truth is, I'm going further than Trump did.
The former president even starting to take note.
He's got a lot of talent. He's getting a little bit controversial. I got to tell him, be a little bit careful.
Ramaswamy wants to end affirmative action.
That you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin.
And stop U.S. support for Ukraine.
Make a hard commitment that NATO should never admit Ukraine.
His poll numbers propelling him to center stage and into his rivals' crosshairs.
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT. We don't need to bring in a rookie.
You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what?
It shows.
But his performance is making an impression.
Strong youthful leadership.
And while Trump remains the frontrunner, even he's fueling buzz for the rival half his age.
Have you thought of Vice President Ramaswamy?
Well, I think he's great. He's got good energy, and he could be in some form of something.
For This Week, Rachel Scott, ABC News, Washington.
Thanks to Rachel for that. Vivek Ramaswamy joins us now. Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you for joining.
And like I said, I will be showing that Vivek Ramaswamy clip right after the two shortest news summaries. But I thought that was really amusing there at the very end when they quoted Donald Trump as saying, well, he could be some form of something. Vivek Ramaswamy could be some form, when they asked if he could be vice president, he could be some form of, that was Glenn Beck, by the way, who was talking to Donald Trump. That is kind of a joke in and of itself. But I think the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary fits my topic of the week best, despite that bias towards the focusing on their exclusive guest, Vivek Ramaswamy, because George Stephanopoulos, who's no stranger to scandal, having worked in the Clinton White House in communications, he's asking, doesn't scandal matter anymore? The guy's got like 91 felonies, and he's like gone up in the polls against other Republicans, and he's 46-46 with the incumbent president. What's up with that? And that's a good question, George. And Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't really give him a good answer. And the first newsmaker clip I will get to after these two brief news summaries. First, CNN State of the Union. There's like a whole Labor Day barbecue metaphor here that goes into a very short news summary that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is like a burger on a Labor Day grill. The 2024 campaign is heating up. Happy Labor Day weekend. The sprint to the Republican primaries is kicking off in earnest, despite 4 indictments and costly efforts by his rivals to overtake him. A new CNN poll of polls shows Donald Trump has an even wider lead in the GOP primary. And in a warning sign for President Biden, a head-to-head matchup found voters evenly split between the two men. Electoral politics followed Biden Saturday as he toured hurricane damage in Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis refused to appear alongside him, though Biden said the two had been in frequent touch about relief efforts. The president is also facing voters' persistent doubts about the economic recovery. His Commerce Secretary just returned from a trip to try to smooth strained relations with China, as investors worry an economic slowdown there could drag down the world's economy. But it's not clear whether China will commit to taking any action. The U.S. wants them to lift restrictions on tech manufacturing. Other issues are addressing unfair trade practices and intellectual property concerns. Here with me now, straight back from her China trip, is Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Thank you so much.
And Gina Raimondo was on multiple programs. This is probably a good time for me to mention that down in the video description under sources, you can see all 5 of the Big 5 corporate outlet news programs on the web and watch them. Sometimes you have to like sign up or have a cable or an account, or I don't know what they make you go through, but you can watch the whole program if you want to see what Gina Raimondo had to say about her trip to China and that just didn't really fit my main topic here. And I thought that was a good news summary, and talking about the presidential race heating up after Labor Day, which is basically the only thing Robert Costa said right before he got to his interview with Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley. Over in the final news summary, I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret is off today. Labor Day weekend typically begins the unofficial end of summer and traditionally is when presidential campaigns ramp up. So we begin this morning with Republican presidential candidate, former UN ambassador, and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley.
And I will have a clip of Nikki Haley. That's the clip after next there. And Robert Costa, in for Margaret Brennan this week, didn't ask Nikki Haley right off about Trump and Trump's troubles and indictments. Actually saved all the questions about why do you want to put a convicted felon in office. Why would you support a convicted felon? Like at the beginning of the last Republican debate, they almost all raised their hands. And so you can see Nikki Haley's response to that. That's also what George Stephanopoulos asked Vivek Ramaswamy at the beginning of right at the beginning of the interview. And he gave this whole convoluted explanation about how he thought that the prosecutions of Trump were illegal and unconstitutional, and he really doesn't know what he's talking about as a former criminal defense attorney. I'll just tell you that. And if you want to see that whole back and forth in the live comments, I just put a link to the whole transcript of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. But what I thought was more interesting then, why did your hand shoot? The first question you'll see that George Stephanopoulos asked was, why did your hand shoot up so fast saying you would vote for Trump even if he were a convicted felon? So when he gets all of those answers, what he did was wrong and it was bad judgment, but I just don't think it's illegal because I have these weird theories about the Constitution that don't make sense. So then George Stephanopoulos started saying, well, if he's did all this wrong, bad judgment stuff, why would you vote for him for president? Why would you support him? And I thought that was kind of the more interesting part of the interview. And so I'm going to show you that 3.5-minute clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Did you find his actions abhorrent around January 6th? You said he was wrong to take the classified information. You said you would not do that yourself, yet you still say you would vote for him for president. That's what I don't get.
George, I said what every Republican nominee said to make it on that debate stage, that we will actually support the Republican nominee from our party. Frankly, I think that this is an embodiment of what's wrong with our culture right now, looking backwards, obsessing over details in the past, going after one man, a deranged mental cultural state in the media and in this country, as opposed to talking about what we need to talk about, how we better declare independence from China than any past president has.
That man is defeating
restore the integrity of a constitutional republic, stimulate our economy. That's what I care about.
Sir, that man is the front runner for the Republican nomination right now. He's a former president of the United States. He's leading you by 40 points, yet you still say you would vote for him despite what you say about his behavior. That's the question I am asking. It's not an obsession.
Just as I expect him to vote for me when I'm the nominee. Well, look, George, I think that the way elections work in the United States of America is that the people in a political party get to choose their nominee, and then the people in the general election get to choose their president. The fact that that's a foreign idea shows how badly our political culture has decayed in this country. That's an obvious statement of how our constitutional republic works. Now, I'm in this race to be that nominee, and I think our republic would be better served if we debated who exactly in the Republican Party and who exactly in the general election was best positioned to reignite our economy, to reunite our country, to declare independence from our adversaries. I've offered unprecedented clarity on how I would go further than Trump in advancing that America First agenda in a way that brings all Americans together. And unlike many in the media, I'm not rooting for division by using a trial or 4 trials about one man to make that a basis for a referendum on an election. No, what I've said is clear. If Donald Trump's the nominee, yes, I will support him. And if I'm the president, yes, I will pardon him, because that will help reunite the country. But it's not the most important thing I'm going to do as the next president. It is the table stakes for moving this country forward.
So your bottom line is that you would vote for a convicted felon because other people are voting for a convicted felon?
My bottom line, George, is that I will vote for the person who I think is best positioned to move this country forward. I do not think that's Joe Biden. I do not think that is whichever other puppet, Kamala Harris or anybody else, that they roll out after Joe Biden. And if I'm expecting and deciding between the nominee, even though I disagree with many of my rivals in the Republican Party on a lot of issues, I think any of them will be better than Joe Biden or Kamala Harris to move this nation forward. And that is my arbiter when I cast my vote for who the next president is. Who's going to serve the interests of the American people? That's not some sort of commitment driven by vengeance or grievance. It is driven by a commitment to our purpose as citizens of this country. And that's what we need to revive in the United States, our civic spirit, remembering that even the America First movement, it is bigger than Donald Trump. It is bigger than me. It is bigger than one political candidate. It belongs to the people of this country, the people of this country who, thankfully, still get to decide who their next president actually is. I want to keep it that way rather than getting a federal police state as the new arbiter of who governs this country, and I stand by that without apology.
Vivek Ramaswamy, thanks very much.
Yeah, you saw there at the end Vivek Ramaswamy talking about the federal police state, and he talked about this like unconstitutional fourth branch of government earlier in the interview. If, like I said, if you read the transcript, at the link I put in the live comments, and George Stephanopoulos kind of let him get away with that because it's kind of there's like an elected county prosecutor in Georgia who has used a grand jury to get charges brought against Trump and his 17 or his 18 co-defendants. That's not anything having to do with the federal government or some fourth branch of government. That's like one of the branches. That's the executive branch, the part of every county, or I don't know if there are counties in the United States that don't have an elected district attorney. I'm sure it's not universal throughout the United States, but that's generally the way it works. There's an elected prosecutor in the county, and that's how it works in Georgia. That's how it works here in California. That when I lived in Missouri, that's how it worked. I'm sure that's the way it works in most states, and that's not an unconstitutional fourth branch of government. I kind of liked that one follow-up question from George Stephanopoulos, because it's kind of what they're all saying. It's like, so your bottom line is you would vote for a convicted felon because other people are voting for a convicted felon? And that's kind of what they're saying. And but then they're also saying, but people aren't going to vote for him. And that, like, I think is the kind of humorous part of this next answer from Nikki Haley, another person who did well at the debate. And the Robert Costa asks her a question more directly about this, if she will still back Trump, should he be the nominee and be a convicted felon? And her explanation is, well, I would vote for him if he were a convicted felon, if he's the nominee, but people are smart and they won't vote for a convicted felon. But didn't she just say she would vote for a convicted felon? So is she saying she's not smart? Or tell me if I'm wrong, if that's what she says in this clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Over the past week, former President Donald Trump, the front runner in the race, he pleaded not guilty to criminal accusations in Georgia. When you were on that debate stage in Milwaukee, which has earned you some good reviews inside of the party, inside of the Republican Party, you raised your hand and said you would still support him if he was convicted of a crime and the nominee next year. Do you stand by your decision to hold up your hand on stage and back Trump should he be the nominee and be a convicted felon?
Well, what you saw were candidates on that stage said that they would do exactly what they signed and pledged to do, which is support the Republican nominee. That's what we are saying. I don't think President Trump's going to be the nominee. I think it's going to be me. But I will tell you that any Republican is better than what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are doing. We
Even
know
if they're
that a vote
convicted
for
of a
Joe
crime?
Biden is a vote for a President Kamala Harris. First of all, he's innocent until proven guilty. But you are implying that the American people are not smart. The American people are not going to vote for a convicted criminal. The American people are going to vote for someone who can win a general election. I have faith in the American people. They know what they need to do. And so I think that, yes, I will support the Republican nominee always, and I will make sure that that person, we're going to pick someone that's going to beat a President Kamala Harris, because we can't have a President Kamala Harris or we'll never get our country back.
How are you going to consolidate quickly the non-Trump vote in this primary? We're now in September, just months away from the early voting.
It's not about consolidating a non-Trump vote. It's about consolidating where Republicans want to go. I believe Republicans want to stop the crazy spending. I believe Republicans want to bring crime down and go back to law and order. I believe Republicans want transparency in schools. I believe Republicans want to secure the border. And I believe Republicans want to prevent war and have a strong national security. That's what we're talking about. It's not about a person, it's about a country. And it's not just about Republicans, it's about independents. It's about conservative Democrats that know that we're going in the wrong direction.
Ambassador Haley, we'll see you soon on the campaign trail. We really appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday morning. Thank you. And we now go to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who is joining us.
Oh, I guess I almost showed you the Bernie Sanders clip there, but no. That was Nikki Haley, and I believe she said what I promised there, that the American people are smart. They're not going to vote for a convicted felon, but she also promised that she would vote for a convicted felon. So did I prove what I said I was going to prove? And does that whole explanation doesn't really stand up. And I'm going to show you another person. This is another Republican Senator, Mike Rounds, talking to Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union. And Mike Rounds has a different dodge here. He just is backing a different candidate. He's like a supporter of Tim Scott. And so, like, his answer to why are you, will you support Donald Trump? Will you vote for him even if he's a convicted felon? It's just, Tim Scott, Tim Scott, Tim Scott. And Dana Bash kind of lets him get away with it. But there's one kind of like interesting part here where he mentions, he was in the Capitol on January 6th. So he's not a big fan of Donald Trump. And so that is kind of a good segue into the Mike Pence clip coming up, because Mike Pence also in the Capitol on January 6th and gets asked a question about how he feels about how the base feels about him, the Hang Mike Pence crowd. How, why is he running to be the nominee of the Hang Mike Pence crowd? That's basically Shannon Bream's question of Mike Pence in the final clip I'm going to show you next. But first here, oh no, I actually have two clips before that. But here's Senator Mike Rounds. There's a Chris Sununu clip in between, sorry. But here's Senator Mike Rounds talking to Dana Bash, of using the I support Tim Scott dodge for quite a while, and then his real feelings about January 6th over here.
Senator, I want to turn to the 2024 race. Donald Trump is set to face 4 separate criminal trials for 91 alleged felonies. This weekend, CNN released a new poll of polls that shows the former president far and away the front runner. 58% is where he stands right now in that poll of polls. If Donald Trump is convicted of a crime, could you support him as the Republican nominee?
I'm pleased to say that I am supporting Tim Scott. And there's a reason why I'm supporting Tim Scott. Number one, he's a guy that will unite the country. Not a lot of people know him yet, but he's a guy that you can trust. He's a guy that you will never be embarrassed about supporting. I want to be able to tell my kids when they're there now, or my grandkids, that I supported a guy who I thought would be good for the entire country. Tim Scott's my guy. I'm going to stick with him. I think he's the best in the field. And that's the direction that I want to see go. He's only got 3-4% of the popular vote right now, but he's working behind the scenes. He's got resources in the bank. I think he's going to be able to make the appropriate moves, and I think he'll do a good job in the debates coming up as more and more people take a look at him and see what he can do.
I appreciate that you are a supporter of your colleague, Senator Tim Scott. But if Donald Trump is the nominee, and if he is convicted of a crime, could you support him?
I'm hoping truly that we get to the point where I don't have to make that type of a decision.
But what if you do?
For me personally, I was there on January 6th. I saw what happened. I'm not happy about what happened. I was not happy with his performance on that particular day. So for me, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to look at other candidates. For mine, it's Tim Scott. And Tim is the guy that I think can unite this country. And once again, I'm going to come right back down to it. He's not well known right now, so he's not polling as high as some of the other folks are. But we need to bring this country together. Tim Scott's the guy that can do it.
And again, I appreciate that you're sticking behind the guy that you supported, but he is so far behind Donald Trump right now. It's very early, but he's very far
long
behind.
Way to go yet, Dana.
So I understand. I definitely understand.
Way to go yet.
Let me just ask you one other question on 2024. If, again, Donald Trump is the nominee, could he beat Joe Biden in 2024?
Well, that's kind of like, that's asking him to forecast the future. I don't know why that's such a great question to ask someone, because, and oh, by the way, if you want to see the rest of that interview, if you want to see what Mike Round said as his answer to that question, over in the live comments, I will put a link to the full transcript of CNN's State of the Union. All of the 5 shows I watched put up transcripts afterwards, except Fox News Sunday. They don't do it every week, and they didn't this week, but the other 4 shows put up transcripts. It makes my job a lot easier and makes it easier to look through and figure out exactly what everyone said and compare. You know, it's a lot faster than video anyway. I thought that was kind of funny that Mike Rounds, you know, I didn't like Trump's performance on that day on January 6th is all he's willing to say about the day that Trump sent a mob to his workplace that like smashed through the windows and tore up the place. I didn't like his job performance that day. That seems kind of weak, but I guess that's the state of the Republican Party. And then the second to last clip I'm going to show you is Chuck Todd over on NBC News' Meet the Press talking to New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who decided not to run against Trump, but has been a critic of Trump. And you'll see in this clip, he starts showing a clip of Brian Kemp talking about how there is no reason to go after Fani Willis, the Fulton County prosecutor who used a grand jury to bring charges against Donald Trump and his co-defendants for their criminal enterprise trying to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. The Republican governor of Georgia says there's no reason to call a special session, and he's also been a critic of Trump. So Chuck Todd uses a clip from him to ask Chris Sununu, how come the presidential candidates running against Trump haven't figured out how to take on Trump like you have and Georgia Governor Brian Kemp? And I don't know, his answer is, it's not so much, I mean, he obviously is not going to, or doesn't want to vote for Trump, but he thinks there's a scenario where Trump's not going to be the nominee, and I think it's kind of weak, and Chuck Todd doesn't really call him on it, as I'll talk about it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Let me start with something that another governor said earlier this week. It was Brian Kemp of Georgia pushing back at some Georgia Trump-supporting State House conservatives who wanted to use the legislature to essentially defund Fani Willis's case against Donald Trump. Listen to what Governor Kemp said about that move.
Up to this point, I have not seen any evidence that D.A. Willis's actions or lack thereof warrant action by the prosecuting attorney oversight commission. The bottom line is that in the state of Georgia, as long as I'm governor, we're going to follow the law and the Constitution, regardless of who it helps or harms politically.
I want to ask you this, Governor Sununu. You and Governor Kemp share this ability to take on Donald Trump and not to get politically penalized for it in your party, in your home state. Why don't other presidential candidates, not named Trump, see the success you and Governor Kemp have had and follow suit?
Well, again, first off, Governor Kemp is spot on. The guy's an oak. He's the oak of Georgia, and he's got some big shoulders, and he handles it just incredibly every time. And, you know, you don't have to make it personal. I'm not saying other candidates do that. I mean, when you're running for president against the former president, it's a very odd dynamic, to be sure. The key to taking on, not just taking on Trump, but you just call the balls and strikes like you see them. You don't make things personal. You do things that are clearly in the best interest of the constituents you serve, regardless of party. Now, I'm a staunch fiscal conservative, and I want to support Republican ideals, but that doesn't mean we're going to bend and break rules, because when you do that, you set precedent for the other side. Now, as for the other candidates running for president, I think you're right. I think they have to be a little tougher on Trump. You know, Chris Christie kind of really goes nuclear on him, and God bless Chris. He does a great job with that. He exposes a lot of that, which I think is important. But I think what we saw on that debate stage last week, I think there was still a little too much kowtowing to him. I mean, you had Vivek saying he was one of the greatest presidents, but he was going to be better than him. You know, he was still going to be running against him. So it was an odd dynamic, to be sure. There's still a lot of time here, a lot of time for this to play out. Over the
Are you
next few
sure? I mean, let me show you this Wall Street Journal poll that came out. Yes, it's a national primary number. Yes, you got to take it with a little bit of a grain, because we know. But as you know, all politics have become national. Trump's lead has expanded. And DeSantis is closer to the single-digit crowd than he is to the 20s where he started off. This is clearly a poll that shows Trump strengthening and everybody else weakening. And this was done post-debate. So it sort of reinforces your point, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm surprised by those numbers. I am. Look, nationally, the polls are very different than what we're seeing where the conversation is really happening. I appreciate we've had one debate nationally. I think that's a very important step. But look at Iowa, look at New Hampshire, where the candidates are on the ground, making their case as strong as they can. Those poll numbers are very, very different, right? Trump is in like the 42% range. And Trump has a floor of maybe 35%. But he also has a ceiling. Ultimately, he probably has a ceiling of somewhere in the high 40s, because over a third of his supporters have said they would happily go to another candidate. They just need more time to look at them. So that's where Trump's weakness really is. It's not a fait accompli. I know a lot of the, not you per se, but a lot in the media are like, oh, this is over, this is over. It's really not. Remember this guy named Barack Obama, who they said had no chance against Hillary Clinton and the Clinton machine and all of that back in 2008. In about 6 months, things got very, very different. So you have to let the process play out. And I think the key is winnowing down that field. I talk about that a lot. We had 13 candidates a month ago. We have 8 or 9 today. I think we'll have 5 or 6 by the time Iowa comes, maybe 3 or 4 by New Hampshire. And then when it's one-on-one, Trump's in trouble. And he knows that. And so depending on who that one is, and it still very much remains to be seen, that's where the Republicans have the opportunity to talk about healing America, not just relitigating Donald Trump's drama.
I don't know. That whole scenario that Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, spun there, where they're going to be like down to 5 or 6 candidates in Iowa and 3 to 4 in New Hampshire, where he's governor, and Trump has a ceiling of support in the Republican Party in the high 40s. Well, the high 40s are going to win him Iowa and New Hampshire, and then South Carolina is right after that. He's doing really well in South Carolina, even though he's running against both Tim Scott and Nikki Haley from South Carolina. And if he beats Nikki Haley and Tim Scott in South Carolina after winning Iowa and New Hampshire, that makes him pretty much unstoppable. And that is a huge flaw in the Chris Sununu scenario that Chuck Todd never really followed up on. He just went on to the feud, the DeSantis versus Biden feud. And here, if you want to, here's the entire NBC News Meet the Press transcript I just put in the live comments if you want to see the whole interview there and verify what I'm saying about no follow-up from Chuck Todd. But finally, I'm going to get to the Fox News Sunday interview with Mike Pence. And like I said earlier, this is the one clip that doesn't really talk about the problems with Donald Trump. Here, they've kind of it's like switched around in like the alternate universe conservative media Fox News world, where Mike Pence's problem is that the Republican base hates him. Like that's the question you'll see Shannon Bream asks him is like, how do you expect to win the Republican nomination when and there's like a Wall Street Journal quote, which remember is owned by the same company as Fox News, and it's all like Rupert Murdoch land, and then they talk about the Wall Street Journal saying that, and then they even go to the Atlantic magazine article, I think it was, where they specifically say, how do you expect to get people to vote for you who wanted to hang you on January 6th? It's kind of a funny question, but it kind of presumes that, and the Wall Street Journal is quote says that a majority or a strong plurality of Republican primary voters think that Mike Pence certified a stolen election, and so they hate him for that. And so this Fox News question kind of presumes the answer to the other. Why is it that there are all these crazy people willing to vote for Donald Trump? Because they believe his lies, basically. There's a strong part of the Republican base that believes the big lie from Donald Trump, believes that Mike Pence could have overturned the 2020 election results if he just had a spine or whatever Trump's tweet said. I can't remember. And here you can see Mike Pence try to explain it to Shannon Bream. And of course, there's no follow-up. Then her follow-up question is you showed up with a real strong personality at the debate. Where'd that Mike Pence come from? Is that even, talk about your softball questions. That's why I keep this clip playing all the way through the softball question that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that final newsmaker clip together over here.
Okay, so let's start here. Brand new polling out of the Wall Street Journal has you in 6th place this morning, and a number of analysts note that you're running to convince millions of GOP voters who may not like you. From the New York Times, it says, if a majority or at least a strong plurality of Republican primary voters believe the lie that the 2020 election was stolen.
Hold on here. I think I
Okay, so let's start here. Brand new polling out of the Wall Street Journal has you in 6th place this morning, and a number of analysts note that you're running to convince millions of GOP voters who may not like you. From the New York Times, it says, if a majority...
Sorry about that. Let me restart the clip there where you can actually see the clip and not just hear the clip. I screwed up the settings on that clip. Here it is.
Okay, so let's start here. Brand new polling out of the Wall Street Journal has you in 6th place this morning, and a number of analysts note that you're running to convince millions of GOP voters who may not like you. From the New York Times, it says, if a majority or at least a strong plurality of Republican primary voters believe the lie that the 2020 election was stolen, how can the man who certified it secure their support? From The Atlantic, the headline asked this question: why does he think the people who wanted to kill him will vote for him? So why take on this fight when the numbers show almost no scenario in which you can grab this nomination?
Well, Shannon, I'm running for president because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. Bidenomics has been a disaster for American families, and that withdrawal from Afghanistan has emboldened enemies of freedom around the world. And I'm just simply, and I say with humility, I'm just simply the most experienced, tested, and proven conservative running for the Republican nomination today. But with regard to the polling, it's just not what I'm seeing on the ground. I spent the better part of last week in Iowa, be back in New Hampshire tomorrow. The encouragement that we're getting on the ground, frankly, our canvassers in Iowa have me running pretty consistently second in that state, tell us that there's plenty of time between now and the Iowa caucuses and when these primaries get underway. And we're just going to continue to take our message, my lifetime in the conservative movement, and offer a fresh vision for the Republican Party and for America.
Well, you got to share a lot of that on the first debate stage. You qualified for the second as well, but you had the most time on that first debate stage. And a lot of folks are talking about the person who showed up there. You got a fundraising bump, according to Politico. They quote a member of your administration from your time as Indiana governor saying, "Where did that guy come from?" So how did you and when did you decide that version of Mike Pence versus the nice guy thing you're always tagged with, that version was going to show up at that debate?
So, yeah, there's that softball question. That was like the worst softball. Well, that was a really bad softball question. I can't say it was the worst softball question ever, but it wasn't certainly a strong follow-up question. Never really asking Mike Pence to explain his problems with what Trump did on January 6th, just like, and it wasn't The Atlantic, by the way, I was wrong. It was the New York Times who had the article or the editorial asking, how does Mike Pence think he's going to win over the voters who wanted to hang him on January 6th or whatever. But no, Mike Pence is not going to be the nominee. I was reading the live comments along the way, and I saw XOXXO Bob Pence. Does he know he doesn't have a chance in hell? See? Thank you, Bob, for that comment. And thank you all the live viewers who showed up to keep me company while I was giving my political commentary and media criticism about all the clips I picked out this week. I enjoyed watching your comments and reading them. I hope you enjoyed it. Enjoyed the time and effort I put into picking out the 11 clips, adding my commentary and criticism like I do every Monday for my Monday Media Mix-Up. For, I guess, the last 118 Mondays. I will be continuing to do it all the way through January 2025. Next week's show is going to be a little bit early. I'm going to go watch some live simulcast Talking Heads Stops Making Sense 40th anniversary event at my local IMAX theater. So I don't know if there are any Talking Heads fans out there, but something, I think it's actually happening in Toronto, but they're like simulcasting it to theaters around the country. And anyway, I bought tickets because I'm a big Talking Heads fan. So I will be doing the show early next week, maybe like 3 p.m., 3:30 p.m., 4 p.m., definitely by 4 p.m. because I started this one at like 4:38 or whatever, and now it's too late to get to the theater by 6 p.m. So there you go. But anyway, I'm ending off on a tangent. I usually don't end off on a tangent, but there you go. And thank you for joining me. I'll be back next Monday, and like I said, every Monday through January 2025. Until next Monday, or maybe I'll upload a video that maybe I'll like take that Fox News inadvertently endorses socialism clip from the beginning and make that like a separate video. That wouldn't be too difficult. I even had like 2 ending questions that I like almost set it up so it would be a clip I can cut out and upload tomorrow. So maybe I'll do that tomorrow or this week. But other than that, I'll be back next Monday and every Monday through January 2025. Thank you for joining me. And until then, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.